Welcome back to Reimagine. Here we are at the conference. We're broaching on mid-year 2021, and this space continues to excite, continues to build, continues to grow. There doesn't seem to be a stopper on the development of this wider crypto ecosystem and blockchain ecosystem that's being developed right here. As in keeping with the themes of so many of our guests that we've spoken to this conference, I'm now joined by a man who I think really stands, at the pinnacle of some of that latest avant-garde cutting edge tech that's really taking the ecosystem to the next level and trying to make it accessible in a different way to a lot of the other, sort of crypto projects we're talking to that are simply about, a speculative asset or a particular token asset. This is taking that to the next level and going beyond. So without further ado, I want to welcome Robbie Ferguson, co-founder and president of Immutable. Robbie, firstly, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Asher. Good to be here.
All right, so kicking things off, Robbie, for those uninitiated in the world of Immutable and what you guys do, give us your basic rundown, give us your elevator pitch to understand a little bit about what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so our mission statement is to make digital worlds real, but what we're really up to is we're making the first layer 2 scaling solution for NFTs on Ethereum. So we want to make it so that anyone who wants to use NFT technology can do so in a completely gas-free way, while having 100% the security of the leading public blockchain, Ethereum, and providing liquidity at every single layer in that stack. So that's what we've built with Immutable X. We actually launched that 3 weeks ago, and we've already seen more NFT trades occur in that layer 2 just for our limited, very alpha subset of God's Unchained cards than for any kind of layer 1 NFT trades in that time. So we've been very excited about that. And this year is all going to be about scaling that technology and enabling as many businesses as possible to use that in scaling their NFTs.
And a very powerful cause and a very powerful case. And I want to delve deep into that sort of, the gas world, the scaling solutions and moving beyond the sort of high fees, low transaction speeds element. But before we do, I want to touch first on God's Unchained, as a project, as an idea, as something that I think spearheaded much of what later became a wider NFT space. Saw that explosion in sort of mid to late 2020 and into 2021, where we've got these incredible valuations and hype and things that are growing. But God's Unchained was there back in 2019. It may not seem that long ago, but in the NFT space,
2018 even actually.
2018 even. Sorry, my apologies.
Yep.
That's I was coming along seeing it in 2019. But so tell us a little bit about the sort of the genesis of God's Unchained and how that sort of broached the NFT space and developed in there.
Yeah, so the plan from day one was always to build a scaling solution for NFTs, but we knew very early on that there was no exciting content for NFTs. There were, a couple of experiences, and we wanted to show the world what the power of this was. And we thought there were no more perfect fit than a video game for a few reasons. One, because $100 billion in in-game items are bought every single year. I'm not talking about spent on box sets copies. I'm talking about spent on literally like the currencies inside these games. So gamers are already spending a tremendous amount of money and they're getting precisely zero value for it. They're not getting anything they can resell. They're not getting any meaningful economic value. They have no guarantees over the future scarcity of these assets or governance of how that economy is run. And that's really important. I mean, it's so important that games like EVE Online have delegations of their top users every single year flying out to the company's headquarters, obviously not this year, and making sure that the changes that they're making to their economy are compliant with their idea of how it should be run. Like that's how serious this stuff is. So there definitely is a very strong existing demand analog in the real world. And so we saw, well, why don't we build the first use case that really shows the power of this? And I can't think of a better example than taking, say, the convenience of a digital massive game like Hearthstone and mixing it with the ability to trade your physical cards and something like Magic the Gathering. That's fundamentally what an NFT does. It allows you to, have the fundamental value proposition of ownership that crypto provides, but expanded to all unique digital assets, not just fungible assets. And so that's how I built God's Unchained. And really the idea there was owning your trading cards is awesome. But also we can build a really, really compelling trading card game with back then what was the startup budget. Now, obviously it's, been one of Ethereum's most profitable games. I think we have more NFTs via God's Unchained than the rest of Ethereum games put together. And that experience with scaling very early on around making literally 13 million NFTs helped us make the optimizations and choices that have led to Immutable X today. Now, of course, it's led by Chris Glay, who brought Magic the Gathering Arena to 200 million recurring revenue during his time there.
And it seems, I mean, obviously everything can be easily said in hindsight, but it seems almost obvious that that's the great testing ground for NFTs. There's the famous story, venture capitalist Tim Draper likes to say that he realized that there was going to be value in digital assets when his son came to him one day and said, I want to buy a sword online. And he says, what do you mean? You want to actually buy a sword to come online? He's like, no, a digital sword for some game his son was playing. And he went, the light bulb clicked and he went, hold on a second, this is big. And obviously you guys took that idea and you really took it to that next level. But you hinted at it a little bit, but could you maybe perhaps break down a little further for the audience why it is so critical and what a blockchain can really do to help provide that sort of internal economy in a game and provide that sort of idea in a space that many would see as, still, it's a little strange, the idea of actually owning a digital item.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is what makes an economy real? And I think the main thing is you need inputs and outputs that you can trust. And quite frankly, I think you need hard cap supply. So I think that, as the US dollar moved away from the gold standard, we saw it enter an era in which the types of changes they were making to the economy were ultimately unsustainable. And unfortunately, the game theory came such that they were basically, selling off debt to future generations, printing money. And right now we're facing a crisis where literally every foreign debtor of who's holding US dollars right now is having those US dollars devalued as the government prints out more money. And so I think the interesting thing there is that without a hard reserve currency or hard cap supply, it's very, very difficult to make good long-term decisions about how value is distributed in the economy. And I think the same thing happens to video games. Without scarce NFTs or some kind of, hard capped underlying blockchain fungible currency running the economy, it's actually pretty much impossible to make a successful long-term economy. And we've seen this time and time again, whether it's the fact that you can't even buy a RuneScape party hat with all of the memory space available to store gold. Like, I think it costs more than 2.147 billion gold, which is like the 2 to the 32 max integer of gold available in the game, or whatever that number is. And the fact is, without having a strong cryptographic base of hard cap supply to run supply and essentially generation of assets in these games, you can't have a true economy. So that's actually like kind of number one. And does that answer the full question, or? Sure.
I mean, if you have more, you can keep going. But yeah, I mean, I've got other questions if you want to take it a different way.
What was the original goal? It was understanding how NFTs changed the game.
Yeah, well, why an NFT is so critical in a sort of game space, in that idea of truly owning something, which seems digital, but how can we sort of turn that into a near physical ownership?
Yeah, right. So I think I went down the path of like how economies are fundamentally run according to underlying fungible currencies run by blockchain, which is very interesting too. But also, like, that all an NFT is doing is saying, well, how much would you spend on a house if you could never resell that house? Probably not that much, because it would just be this rented asset with utility value only, rather than having the option to sell it later. So becoming an asset class. And so that's what we're doing. We're turning this $100 billion rental market into an asset market. And I expect that when you turn something from a rental market into an asset market, it will at least 10x. And then typically on those assets, you have financial services and leverage, which will do another 10x. So we're looking at taking the market of, economic value available to gaming and digital assets into, at least $1 trillion over the next decade with NFTs. But also the nice thing is it's actually better for gamers and the game developers themselves. And that's because for the first time ever, you can have an aligned incentive. Right now, when Hearthstone tells you cards in a game, they're not doing you the justice of an aligned incentive sale. Like, that's just essentially trying to milk with customer acquisition costs the nth degree of sense from every customer. If they know that they have to give a customer a ton of value and like every card in the game in order to milk 10 cents of marginal value, they will, because that has zero cost of goods sold for them. If they can milk $100,000 out of a whale, they absolutely will too. And there are gaming businesses which build their models based on that. But the problem is that value is, they're giving one form of value to this player, one form of value to this player. At the end of the day, they actually don't care what the future secondary value of those items is, what the equity of those digital assets is, which is the whole point of building a gaming economy. And not every game will run on this, but the ones who are trying to build economy have to have aligned incentives with the participants in the network. Because with NFTs, like every single person who owns a Gods Unchained card is an owner of Gods Unchained. If Gods Unchained goes well and grows, you know, their assets become more rare, more valuable. And that's powerful because it means that our incentive is precisely aligned with their incentives, which is increasing the long-term like market capitalization and equity of those items. So that's what I think is really exciting, is the shift in incentive model. And it doesn't mean game developers can't make money. It's just a new way of making money that is more aligned with customers' needs and wants, because suddenly you have this new value chain of secondary market trades. You have this new value chain of provenance on assets where valuable people can accrue value to an item based on how it was used. If a particular card was used in the tournament to win the tournament, then the streamer who used it can get that marginal value, and that's distribution for the game. So I think that there's all these sorts of interesting things, fundamentally similar to the real world when you play anything with physical asset ownership in the real world.
So then, and I know you're chomping at the bit to get to it, and as am I, but so let's now turn to this, idea and problem that you guys are trying to solve with Immutable X. And I want to talk about that through the lens, perhaps, of the problem itself, which is at the end of the day, as great as it is to have this aligned incentives and this, equitable ownership and an established functional economy, if you're unable to function within that economy without prohibitively high fees, without incredibly slow turnover, and the all-important scaling issues that we see in so much of the blockchain and crypto space, it's not going to work. So how have you guys attempted to solve this?
Yeah, spot on. So, and part of the reason that Gods Unchained trading has been hamstrung over the past couple of years is Gods Unchained items aren't $10,000 art pieces. They're supposed to be utility items where you're trading them around and they're useful in different decks, and you'd want to be able to buy the deck your opponent used immediately after they beat you. Like, that's the kind of use cases that we see really generating high volume and high utility for players, rather than just being these speculative assets. And the problem is, to trade one of these items right now on Ethereum costs you $50, but you want to use Ethereum because that's the highest level of possible security. It's where everyone trades, and it's where all the successful projects are. Like, not using Ethereum is, quite frankly, very silly. Every single competitor who's tried to compete with Ethereum has failed for one reason or another. One of the main ones is it's hard to build a soul. And the main reason developers use Ethereum is because it has the soul of an open source ecosystem, which is fundamentally committed to decentralization at every layer of the stack. That was kind of what was in its culture from its inception, rather than being, buckets of VC cash and trying to buy people onto their chain. So that was kind of the first thing. But then the second thing is you're totally right with gas fees. And the way we decided to solve that was building on Ethereum rather than competing with it. And the only way you can actually use Ethereum's level security is via a layer 2 solution. And things like sidechains, although they may say they're a layer 2 solution, are not a layer 2 solution, because they're just a blockchain with a bridge to Ethereum. They have their own consensus mechanism. You're relying on them for their security. If someone goes to their headquarters with a wrench, like, your assets could be stolen. If the company shuts down, your assets could be stolen or compromised. Like, no one's putting a $69 million beeple on a sidechain right now. And that's really important, because the scaling protocol we're building has to be able to support Blizzard wanting to use Ethereum, or Epic Games wanting to use Ethereum, or Ubisoft wanting to use Ethereum, or Goldman Sachs wanting to use Ethereum for the trading desk for unique financial assets. And they're not going to go with the solution that has even the slightest 0.5% chance risk across a lifetime of either being dead in a decade or having the assets compromised. So that's why we decided to go with zero knowledge proofs via Starkware. And really, up until 18 months ago, that wasn't even, people thought it was like a crazy science experiment. But we've launched 3 weeks ago with the first ever like layer 2 trading of NFT on Ethereum. So we're very, very excited about the traction so far, and it's essentially ready for the mainstream.
It appears ready for the mainstream, and already, just looking over some of the headlines that have come out over the last few weeks, you guys, there are already claims of, millions of dollars being saved in gas fees, the sort of, transmissibility, what is it you guys are claiming, like 9,000 transactions per second? I mean, those are some pretty staggering statistics.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, my favorite thing is that these trade values are $20. Those trades would never occur on Ethereum otherwise. We are unlocking an entire market of activity that is currently locked off by prohibitive gas fees. And the future of Ethereum is both high value, sexy art assets and stuff. And that's why we build on a ZK rollup, because no one's going to use an insecure solution. So if we want those assets to scale, and they should be able to, they have to be able to use something which lives and breathes Ethereum security at its core. But also, we've got to make it so a game developer can mint 10 million NFTs in a day and pump out rewards their entire ecosystem. That's the future we're building toward. And if Ethereum's going to win, that's the level of scale that it needs.
So then, bringing this back down to brass tacks, to the user experience, to that user that's not necessarily interested in the plumbing that's going on behind the scenes, but the day-to-day lived experience. How far are we away from, the child, swapping his Pokemon cards on the playground or whatever it is that kids are trading these days in the physical form? How far are we from that in the digital NFT space?
I think it's coming a lot faster than possible. And to their credit, people like NBA Top Shots have moved forward the industry with good user experiences, despite the difficulties in withdrawals. Ultimately, our strategy is, we're the scaling solution. We allow you to use Ethereum safely. You can come to us with any commercial or user experience you like. Like, we'll provide a great default, which offers you fiat on rails, fiat off ramps. But ultimately, if someone says, hey, we want to do everything ourselves, like, that's not up to us to decide. And I think that's really important, is recognizing that the future of NFT trading is going to be custom to the businesses that want to use it. And we just have to provide the easiest, fastest solution for them to use the leading public blockchain, Ethereum, as their default network for trading and storing value.
So would you see yourselves as, I guess, more arbiters of a ultimately decentralized network that you're helping to provide access to, or do you see Immutable still playing that sort of pivotal, key role in actively making things happen? Obviously, the centralization, decentralization debate, so pivotal. Whenever an organization, makes a new technology, are they then trying to claim ownership of it or help put it out into a wider ecosystem?
The network effects of Ethereum are very strong, but there are many threats coming out of the woodworks from things like Binance Smart Chain and other centralized alternatives. And ultimately, with the level of decentralization theater that's going wrong, where people are saying solutions are layer twos, or solutions are, accretive to Ethereum, when they're actually just completely a competitor, in my opinion. Anything that is not directly using Ethereum for its security, consuming Ethereum for its proofs, or adding on financial leverage that has to be secured by Ethereum, or economic bandwidth, that they call it, is fundamentally an Ethereum competitor. What we view ourselves as is, we want to be the person making mass market availability to use NFTs on Ethereum in order to make sure that they are the winner. And look, that's not selfless. It's not as if we're like these magic open sourced fairies. We want to make sure the leading public blockchain is decentralized. What matters to me is that in the future, the choice that wins here, the network which builds network effects the fastest, is going to be the default set of digital physics that governs how secure users' digital assets are in the future. And this choice is going to stick around for many, many decades. And I want to make sure that that choice is not something that can be controlled by venture capitalists. It's not something that can be controlled by a single company. Like, this has got to be something which works for everyone. Otherwise, there's literally no point. Like, let's just go use another database.
It's interesting. I mean, the strength of your views towards Ethereum as the be-all and ultimate solution for this sort of space. I mean, projecting ahead, looking at the crypto space, obviously you're not going to know how network effects truly play out. There's so many variables involved. But I mean, do you ultimately see this as a funneling effect towards Ethereum as the one ultimate solution for the smart contract, NFT, and all those solutions? All right, leaving Bitcoin out of the equation, but all the solutions that so many other chains are attempting to solve.
It's not that I think Ethereum is even the best technology right now. It probably is. It's that the network of developers and the commitment to decentralization as the philosophy with which Ethereum is governed is unparalleled and is very, very difficult to beat. But in order for it to retain that power, in order for it to make sure that the future is, a truly decentralized one, because I'm like, maybe, EOS does win, and then they become fully decentralized, and they have the same commitment to decentralization that all the ETH core devs do, and they have the same governance policies. I don't think so, but it's certainly possible. But I don't want to take a bet. I want to make sure that the leading solution wins, and that leading solution needs a powerful business offering a frictionless use case for major businesses who want to come on board that, and that's Immutable.
It's a compelling narrative, you know, the way you talk about projecting this out into the longer term, you know, and you mentioned before your Goldman Sachs, your JP Morgans, your whomever who's going to come on board and want a problem, you know, to buy something or, you know, utilize NFTs in a space that has not even that 0.005%, 0.01, whatever percent chance of failure or breakdown, that's had that sort of fidelity proven over time, that's had that network effect proven over time, and that growth of network. How close do you think we are to that tipping point? You know, with NFTs exploding as they are at the moment, many are calling this a hype cycle. It's going to see a natural retraction. But how do you feel about that as someone so entangled within that space?
Two things. One, even though there was a massive bull run in the very start of 2018 and the end of 2017, which crashed, we still saw ETH devs in particular increase year on year throughout the bear market, which is important because it's a testament to the fact that over allocation of capital is actually an indication of the strength of the nascent technology. And so I think that's a good thing. But B, this isn't just some, you know, big bubble in fungible tokens. This is a real adoption of use case. People are using NFTs. Major gaming companies are looking at their NFT entry plays. Major financial institutions are looking at, well, how do we make sure that we aren't screwed when the new digital revolution of how value is transferred, stored, and customers incentivized comes around? And like we've seen entirely new innovations in business model tactics over the last year that have never before been possible. We saw SushiSwap take on overnight Uniswap with a forked version of their code via like an incentive attack, an incentive coordinated vampire attack with tokens. And of course, Uniswap has successfully fended that off, though now SushiSwap is a credible competitor. So like these sorts of things are tactics that companies can't be missing out on in terms of token incentivization. But more importantly, every single large company in the world right now is forming their strategy on how they enter into the NFT space much, much faster and much more credibly than they were planning 6 months ago.
Do you think that these particularly, and I'm talking legacy finance and the sort of legacy companies that might be looking to get into this space, these big business incentives, do you think they're really savvy enough, or they're going to get savvy enough quickly enough to truly understand the technological differences and the nuances? And maybe this is a case for Ethereum anyway, just because they have the largest network. But still, do you think that distinction and that subtlety is going to make its way across, or it's just a case of fidelity proven over time, network size, when it comes to who's going to come out the successes in, you know, sort of current crypto wars? I don't know if that's too strong a word, but, you know, that are being fought over what's credible and what's not.
Network effects matter. I won't lie to you. That's why we're fighting as hard as we are for Ethereum. But ultimately, these companies are conducting thorough RFPs. They are interrogating at the end of the day, what is the cost to attack the security of the assets on which I'm positioning my business? And if that cost is the cost to attack a sidechain, or if that cost is a new blockchain, or if that cost is the existential risk of, you know, a blockchain being taken over by a government, which, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum have been classified as not being a security by the SEC. That's massive to have that kind of advantage for those chains versus other chains. These are risks that a large company will absolutely take into account. They're going to do a massive due diligence process. And quite frankly, this is the solution that a lot of those due diligence processes lead to. But if we don't get this right, and if the network effects aren't built soon, absolutely. Like you can't overcome where are you going to trade NFTs for the best possible price. And so it's really important that, you know, we make these strides this year.
You mentioned earlier, you know, Binance Chain as a potential competitor, and one you sort of said as a centralized market masquerading as decentralized. You know, it's now their coin, BNB, now the #3 coin in the world. You know, staggering growth it's seen over the last few months necessarily. I mean, is there any concerns there for you that could cause a problem in the industry, that represents a problem or a lack of awareness? Thoughts?
It's not a problem. Competition's good. Like the Binance team is really efficient and effective, and I'm glad that they're doing what they're doing. However, I'm here to bring transparency to the trade-offs that consumers get when they make different choices. And obviously, we need businesses which are as commercially savvy, as good as generating content and products and product market fit as what Binance has done for their chain on something that's truly decentralized. I mean, to make users aware of those trade-offs, like that's brand, that's competition, baby. Like let's go to market and let's do this.
Yeah. Fair enough. Awareness is always a winner. But as we know, when it comes to business, and particularly when it comes to the crypto space, businesses are not operating in a vacuum. Businesses, as much as it may be decentralized, as much as it may cross borders, at the end of the day, if you particularly want legacy, organizations involved, as the market gets larger and harder to ignore, regulators are coming in. You mentioned the SEC there earlier, but regulation in the NFT space. Start with broad strokes. Do you feel it's keeping up? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's quashing innovation? Do you have any concerns?
I think regulators are well behind the NFT space. I don't even think they've barely started looking at it. So it's entirely up in the air. I will say that I think it's fundamentally quite different to fungible tokens, because what we're describing is a much safer regulatory space, which is you're encapsulating like a utility item. It's not a financial asset. You're literally representing ownership of something. So I think that I would have a much safer expectation of how this space will be regulated than potentially like the ICO period.
Okay, so you don't see this as a sort of recreation of that hype and boom, because at the end of the day, you think that
it all depends on how the NFTs are used. Like, at the end of the day, it's just a token standard. I can issue an ERC20 for anything I like. Some of those things will be classified as the securities. Some of those things will be classified as not. Some of those will, never even register as a blip on the SEC's roadmap. So I think it all depends on how are these token standards used. But in general, broadly, I think it goes towards use cases that are going to be, viewed as much more compliant by regulatory bodies.
And projecting forward, this is one of my favorite games to play, and I know it's speculative, but looking ahead at the NFT space and the work you guys are attempting to do in the wider space, give it a time frame. I'm not going to set for you, because some industries it's easy to look 1 year ahead, some it's easy to look 5. But what do you see as an idealized space? How do you see this market coming to sort of full maturity in the next whatever period you determine?
I see it as people using NFTs without knowing the particular, they don't have to use MetaMask in an account or all of that jazz, and it just being the way that assets are used and traded in the vast majority of like backends. So similar to, how a lot of DeFi is actually powering fintechs nowadays, and like these massive fintechs are taking big bets on Bitcoin and their balance sheets. I see it as gaming studios, financial studios, art marketplaces starting to build NFTs into how you own and trade assets on the internet. And eventually, I'd like to see people owning assets as the default expectation, not as this crazy new futuristic value proposition. If you bought an item in a game in 30 years' time, I would want a kid to be like, well, that's strange, when I tell them the story of how that used to just be a line in a database that you couldn't own. Like, it should feel as natively ownable to people of the future as physical objects are to us, guaranteed by the laws of physics, which we're born into.
Do you see the potential going beyond, the potentially gaming, maybe even, sort of art space? What are the sort of other industries that you think NFTs stand to disrupt, and maybe ones that perhaps you guys are even looking at?
Yeah, I mean, any single unique asset in the world should be eaten by NFTs and will be eaten by NFTs. We're going to start with digital native spaces, and that's because you don't have to provide custodial relationships to assets in the real world. So it's much, much easier to encapsulate that value. Those are things like art, right? So the thing I love about art NFTs is that the value proposition is not reliant on anything other than the existence of that NFT. It's not saying this art won't be replicated or stored or copied. In fact, the replication of these images is probably going to accrue more value to the original. Instead, it is this brand new conceptualization of value, which is just like the original Mona Lisa. Even if you could create a perfect carbon copy replica, will be worth $1 billion, and this one's worth 30 grand, 50 grand, because you can prove this one is original and provenance. We can now have it in the digital world. So, I think it's amazing that people can issue a one-of-one digital image. Like, that is what ownership means in the future. But that's just one slim value hypothesis on how NFT is going to be used and traded valuably. There's also going to be utility NFTs in gaming. There's also going to be NFTs which encapsulate relationships to real financial value, and those relationships in the real world have to be maintained. Whatever the weakest link in that chain of custody is going to be the quality of ownership and financial value to that asset. By that, I mean, if you get an NFT of a house or of a physical art like a watch or a bottle of wine, What matters is, at the end of the day, if you trade that NFT, can you always recover the physical custody of the asset at the end of the day? Or can you always guarantee it? And this is the problem we've dealt with centuries, right? Like, if I could somehow buy the rights to gold underground, protect it, there'd be no need for me to mine it. Like, mining gold is just complete destruction of value, apart from the fact that it allows us to efficiently provide secure custody and allocate that value and like measure that value. But like, that gold is there in the ground and no one's using it. Like, it's just, we're just pulling it out of the ground and then putting it in boxes and then selling it to people. Why not sell it in the ground? And these are the kinds of questions that are going to have to be solved as we move to a fairly non-custodial future. Like, even StockX is a brilliant example of this, where a lot of these sneakers being traded are never taken into custody. Like, that is a perfect example for NFTs.
Do you see this sort of the awareness of this economic change and that sort of like understanding digital activity? I mean, you spoke about a child in 30 years finding it strange. Fine, that child maybe, you know, the digital native. But do you think it's going to require that sort of generational change? Are older generations, our parents' generations, grandparents, whatever they might be, are they going to understand this, or do we need to shift this to focusing on younger generations?
Yeah, in the same way that our parents don't have to understand this natively culturally, they just have to know that they're now getting 8% in a secure manner from this DeFi contract that they're yield farming on. Like, that percent yield is what they need to know. So at the end of the day, you've got to provide real financial value to people. You've got to have product market fit. That product market fit is going to be different for different people. What I'm saying is I want the expectation to be of digital ownership for NFTs.
Powerful expectation, and one we'll have to see as that market matures. But you know, Robbie, I think it's an amazing vision what you guys are doing. Obviously, you're right at the start of this. You know, I was looking through some of your literature. The steps you have this all laid out for as you get to a wider market and a wider market fit. It's super powerful. Interesting to see how this vision does play out. Any last words you have on either on Immutable X itself, on the industry, philosophy writ large?
No last words. No last words.
No last words. All right.
I'll stop there.
All right, fair enough. A man who knows when he said his piece and to leave it sitting, and I respect that. So, you know, Robbie Ferguson, I want to thank you so much. Fascinating to see what Immutable's up to, what God's Unchained achieves, and so much beyond, as we highlighted here. So thanks again for coming on and speaking with us. For those watching, make sure you stay with us at REIMAGINE. So much more to come.